Welcome to the first of this year's Shakespeare theme speaker series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Justin Fout. I serve as principal of Immaculata Classical Academy. We're a preschool through 12th grade Catholic independent school for the whole family, including students with Down syndrome, autism, and special needs. Our speaker series is just a small effort to give back to the community. We know that culture is rebuilt in homes, in parishes, and at schools, and hopefully this sort of night supports that. You'll find on your table there's a couple handouts. The first has a picture of William Shakespeare. You need to make sure you have that. Our speaker will be referring to that throughout the evening. And there's a second handout that has a table of contents on the front. And that is some wonderful resources he'll be sharing with us. His goal tonight is that you hear the voice of Shakespeare. So it's important that you follow along. So make sure everybody has one of those handouts. There should be plenty for everybody. If you're short at a table, steal one from another table. There's an empty seat, okay? Want to make sure everybody knows, feel free, even though I know you have wine right now, you have food, feel free during the presentation to go back and fill up your wine and get more food. The only time we ask you not to do that is during the performance. But all the other times, feel free. There's restrooms down the hallway. Make yourself at home. In 2018, tonight's speaker celebrated 50 years of teaching, or as he prefers to say, 50 years of mentoring students to fall in love with learning by reading and conversing about the best writings worth reading by master thinkers who address the timeless perennial questions about man, God, and their enduring bond. Over the years, he gravitated towards teaching only in institutions or programs that promoted integrated learning in humanities, philosophy, and theology, such as the program of liberal studies at the University of Notre Dame, the honors program at the University of New Mexico, the Rome program for the University of Dallas, the Foundations program at Assumption College, Magdalen College, and currently Thomas More College of Liberal Arts. Since 2000, he has been the executive director of the Fides et Ratio seminars, which conducts summer week-long seminars for faculty from primary and secondary through college and university learning, who are hungry for the week-long intellectual and spiritual retreat that is funded by his lifelong friend, Dr. Donald DeMoore, who is the CEO Emeritus of Big Y Foods and also holds a PhD in Aristotelian philosophy from the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Powers received his education from Bishop Laughlin in Brooklyn, New York, Assumption College in Worcester, Massachusetts, and doctoral studies at the University of Notre Dame, all of which he notes were all-male institutions, and which he asserts were much better off not encouraging coeducation. He has been married for 46 years to Mary Ann, who shares his educational vocation as a professor of art history at several colleges in New Hampshire, and as the executive director of the American Academy for Liberal Education, which primarily accredits K-12 primary and secondary private, charter, and class academies dedicated to preserving robust liberal education. Mary Ann participates in the Fides et Ratio seminars by lecturing on Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel, the Papal Basilicas, Leonardo da Vinci, and George Peter Alexander Healy, an Orthodox Catholic who was America's preeminent portrait painter in the 19th century. While he has not devoted himself to writing and publishing, next year he will publish an annotated edition of Savrolo, Winston Churchill's only novel, which is a story of a young man's intellectual and political education that doubles as an account of Churchill's own understanding of his youthful, non-university education and preparation for leading Great Britain during World War II. Patrick and Mary Ann have 3 sons in their 20s, Christopher, Samuel, and James, who were adopted from Peru in the days and aftermath of Peru's civil war against the Maoist Sendero Luminoso, or Shining Path. I'll also mention on a personal note, I had the privilege of having Dr. Powers as a professor in college. I'm not just saying this because he's here, but some of his classes were my very favorite, and he definitely helped me be a better student, better thinker, and helped me to be the man that I am today. So I'm very privileged and honored to welcome Dr. Powers.
Thank you very much for having me here. There are some things I could say about my biography which would be fruitful for you, but I'll let it go, and maybe during question period you can ask me some things. I'm actually quite serious about the all-male education that I had. Gave me a perspective on life, and I'm so old that I remember everything from the late 50s and early 60s. But fortunately for me, I wasn't affected by the 60s. That's fortunate, it really is. But the depressing thing is that, God, first of all, I always knew that the 60s we wouldn't recover from them, and we really haven't. But the fact that I wasn't affected by the 60s can sometimes be very depressing for me, because I see where we were in the 60s and I see where we are now. And I have to laugh in order to keep my balance, because it's gotten very insane. And yet if you look back with a perspective such as I have, you could see the seeds of everything that's happening now. And I'm being only veiledly polite about the fact that I'm not happy with what's happening these days in generally in cultural terms and in Catholic terms. The one thing I will say about an all-male education bears on my children. So we have 3 adopted boys from Peru, and when we realized that we wouldn't be having our own children, we were married in 1973, significant year, if you remember, in terms of Roe v. Wade. By the time we realized we wouldn't be having our own children, there were no longer homes for unwed mothers. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't easy to adopt on the East Coast. I was put on a waiting list for Catholic Charities, and eventually they threw me off at the age of 40 because I was too old to adopt. And then we wound up going out of the country, and I wanted them from one culture, and my wife has brother-in-law who's actually Guatemalan, so we figured the Hispanic side of the family. And Marianne, we assumed we'd only have one child. It was expensive, so that's why. Not because we only wanted one child, but it was expensive. And so I said to Marianne, well, and she said, well, if it was by nature and God's gift, whoever it was, whatever it was. But if it's going to be once and we have to choose, then let's have a girl. I said, okay. Well, the day we found out about the birth mother who gave birth, it was a beautiful young woman, it was a boy. And at first she looked at me, and then she said, is he healthy? I said, yes. She said, that's all that matters. Then the second time we went to adopt was 11 years later. Christopher was, he was 11. That's right. I said it. So I said to her, so this time round, do you want a boy or girl? And we knew they'd be older. And Marian's response was, at my age, I don't want an older female psyche coming at me fully armed. That was literally her words. And she said, besides, boys are so easy. Chris was only 11. This is where her naivete came in. And so then they show up, the 2 of them, and that's Samuel and James, and they are blood brothers. And the 3 of them get on very, very well. But when someone asks me, now they're in their 20s, and they were delayed because of the adoption in terms of their maturity. For Chris, it presented a crisis, but for Sam and James, it's been very good. They were orphaned. Chris was not orphaned, and so there's always this question and problem about my birth parents. But Sam and James were orphaned, so they really are homebodies. And it's a beautiful thing, but they also were slow in growing up. And now, with 3 boys in their 20s, Marianne's concern to me and lament is why don't they listen? I don't understand. And I said, have you ever looked and Sam is the youngest one. He's this charming boy. He is Teflon for criticism. It doesn't bother him. He doesn't get upset. And he certainly doesn't take it seriously. And so I said, Marianne, just look in his left ear. What do you see out there? And she got what I was getting at. I see space. I see emptiness. I can hear the wind whistling. I said, yeah. And she said, what does that mean? I said, we have 3 boys. And when people ask me what they have in common, I said, they share one brain. It's really simple. Now, that's our experience with boys. Maybe you people have a different experience. So anyway, that's a bit of my background biography. And I will say, to get now to the talk, yeah, it's been a long journey for me in terms of, having lived through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and we just keep on adding. And so what keeps me, laughing? Well, for one thing, Shakespeare. So, for example, the play Much Ado About Nothing tonight is so complicated. It's like there are so many relationships going on, and there's good ones and there's bad ones. And the play Much Ado About Nothing demonstrates that every comedy has a dark background. And it's also true that every tragedy has a comic foreground. So even the play Macbeth, if you know it, and I'm not presuming you know the plays, but then again, I'm not trying to be condescending. Maybe you do, and you probably read ones that I haven't read because I haven't read all of them. What's the foreground? Wait a minute, this is a dark tragedy, Macbeth, the Three Witches. So where is the comic? It's a tragedy up front. So where's the comic background? It's in the porter who answers the door. And given my audience, I can't read the whole porter's speech. It's very funny, though, for you older adults. You should read it. It's charming. It's classic Shakespeare bawdy, but it's very nice bawdy. Sorry, I think it is. If you're going to have bawdy, you should do the porter's speech. And Shakespeare is bawdy. And people always say to me, I'm so offended. Shakespeare's so bawdy. Why is he so bawdy? And there's a simple answer. He's not a Puritan. He didn't buy the Puritan Kool-Aid, if you will, in England. Well, yeah, but he really carries it to an extreme. Yes, he does, but he always balances it in the end. And a good example of that is Measure for Measure. Has anyone here ever read Measure for Measure? It's a wonderful play worth reading. And it has a dark background. But it seems to confirm the notion that with Shakespeare, all's well that ends well, that every comedy has a quote-unquote happy ending. It does. And there's peace, there's resolution, and there are moments when you have an idea it's going to work out. It has to because it's a Shakespearean comedy. But he takes you on a roller coaster ride. And as I said, there are these dark moments. And so at the end of Measure for Measure, someone named Lucio, light, he should be, but it could be Lucifer. You don't know. That's the point. Is it good light or is it bad light? He's going to be punished by the Duke. So Shakespeare has been a good part of my, but not only Shakespeare, but certainly Shakespeare has been a good part of that which keeps me balanced, the sort of balanced pole of my life. So now you have two booklets in front of you, and you've got more than you ever wanted to receive, more than you ever need to know. But I do want to know, and I can't, they've got me as if I were in Hollywood. So with the lights, are there any homeschooling parents here? But of course, what do you call it? Justin doesn't want that at Immaculata Academy.
That's not true.
So is there any people homeschooling or did homeschool at some point?
Many years ago.
10 years ago? Okay, that's fine. And even if you're not homeschooling, the first booklet is actually this one, and it's a resource book. And it's not because I just wanted to educate you, but it's hard to talk about Shakespeare sensibly without having some sense of things in the background. And particularly for the way I tend to wind up looking at Shakespeare. And then the other booklet, which I've got scattered all over here, these are the readings or the performances we're going to do. And that's the jewel in the crown for tonight. So I've got to get down to the talk. I've already eaten up more time than I should have. And we're going to start, though, with this booklet. So if you would open up, and I'll tell you when to turn and so forth. And you're looking at the table of contents and going, oh, my Lord. So turn to page 3. So why pay attention to Shakespeare and his works? And I was redundant here, the word introduced twice. Sorry. Shakespeare, An Introduction to the Bard's Works, which is the title of tonight's presentation, introduces us to the bard as a pragmatic poet-philosopher of our civilization, who educates as he entertains. Oh, paradigmatic, I'm sorry, not pragmatic. I'm saying to myself, why did I put pragmatic in there? Paradigmatic, he's the paradigm of the poet-philosopher of our civilization. He is the paradigm. How do I know that? Just because I say it? No, I'll show you in a second. Who educates as he entertains. The aim of the course, this is I wrote originally for the syllabus. As a matter of fact, I think Mary may have, when did you graduate, Mary? No, I wrote this in 2013. So the aim of the course is to learn to love Shakespeare's dramas as discourses about the conditions, causes, and principles of men's actions, reflections, and prayers as they aspire to the heights and succumb to the depths of human longings and capacities. Now, that's a mouthful, but it's true. And there are 36, 37 plays that keep on saying they've discovered another one that he had some hand in. But it's true. So, aspire to the heights. I'd say Winter's Tale at the end, one of his last plays. To the depths of human longings and capacities, Othello for starters, Macbeth for another one. Each Friday, and this was the syllabus, for 2+ hours of intensive reading and discussion, students are entertained and educated by the Bard of Avon as he transports them to ancient Greece and Rome, Renaissance Padua and Venice, Reformation Denmark, and multiple epochs of England's history. They are mystified by his last plays, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest, which evoke wonder at the breadth and depth of the poet's vision of our mysterious creation. First and foremost, Shakespeare's poetic greatness rests on his exceptional capacity as a master storyteller. Be the tale a tragedy, comedy, history, or romance. That's the name given to the last plays. I'll deal with it. I'll use it. About men's fears and hopes, sufferings and consolations. The Bard's dramatic staging of the lives, longings, and loves of exceptional and typical men and women persuades students that they are encountering kinds of persons who are obviously foreign to their own time and place, yet equally familiar to their own lives in the here and now. So these are pretty abstract things, but I thought them over a lot, and throughout the whole semester I try and show why I said what I said. If you turn the page, part 1, all about the wonder of Will's enduring appeal. This one's short, but it's really kind of hilarious. It's called Shakespeareans.com, and Google this. There are 2 ways that you can do it. The Bard on the boards. Here's the list of what's playing where. But if you can, there's a switch, there's a thing you can click, and it says, here's a list of where is playing what, so it reverses. So you can get what's being played by the play, or you can get it by where it's occurring. And I didn't want to give you both, you can get the other one. So here I gave you by the play. And this is for 2019-2020. And it's worldwide. Now, the reason why I would have gotten the other one was there's a half page of Shakespeare productions happening now and this coming spring in Kentucky. So if you just turn, look at so page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11. These are all the Shakespeare productions, and they're occurring across the United States. You can pick out cities. They're New York, San Jose, California. They had Boston, Ashland, Saskatchewan, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Washington, Tennessee, Australia. They didn't give any for Europe, so this is an English-speaking, and they didn't get many for England, actually. Well, of course not. I mean, I can see why. And then there was Canada in there, too. So what's my point? Why hasn't Shakespeare died? I mean, why? He should be out of date, right? But he's not. So there is something enduring about Shakespeare, and it's something you don't have to push. You don't have someone out there who exists just to make sure that people don't forget Shakespeare. That's pretty impressive. So the next is Shakespeare's Life. It's on page 13. Now, this is from the Folger Shakespeare Library, and on the cover page, I just say Folger. Later on, the link for folgershakespeare.com will appear, and you would go there. So I'm not going to read all, I have no intention of reading it, but Folger is the premier, it's the world's largest Shakespeare library. It's in Washington, D.C. It's just around the corner from the Capitol. It's worth visiting. So Shakespeare's Life, Birth and Childhood, Marriage and Children, London Theatre, Final Years, okay? Now, if you go to page 17, Shakespeare's Contemporaries. And the contemporaries are people who were also playwrights. Shakespeare's lifetime was the golden age of theater. It's true in France, it's true in Italy, it's true in Spain, it's true here. And famous one on page 19, Christopher Marlowe and Ben Jonson, they were alternately, people promoted the case that they were Shakespeare and that Shakespeare is a phony. It's a pseudonymous situation. So look at how many people were, and we're up now to page 20, who were actually playwrights at the same time. Okay, so will Shakespeare stand up? Turn to page 21, and this I will read part of. There was a new film called Anonymous, and this goes back to 2011. I'm almost sure I gave it when Mary was in the class. It says, "The Bard was a fraud, don't buy it." I'm not going to read the first paragraph. It's about Roland Emmerich, and Simon Schama he's an academic with a rapier tongue. And so he takes Emmerich out, and he makes the argument. He says, this is the argument they're making, why Shakespeare is not Shakespeare. Then they have alternative candidates for the real Shakespeare, have numbered the Cambridge-schooled Christopher Marlowe, who also happens to have been killed before the greatest of Shakespeare's plays appeared. That's an example of his tart humor. Right, Marlowe wrote them from the grave, sure. And the philosopher-statesman Francis Bacon, and blah, 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 Earl of Oxford. Okay, next paragraph. None of which would matter very much, were there not something repellent at the heart of the theory. And that something is the toad, snobbery. The engine that drives the Oxfordian case against the son of the Stratford Glover, John Shakespeare. John was indeed illiterate, but his son was not, as we know incontrovertibly from no fewer than 6 surviving signatures in Shakespeare's own flowing hand. The first from 1612, when he was giving evidence in a domestic lawsuit. The Earl of Oxford was learned by more reports, was learned and by reports witty. But publicity materials for Anonymous say that Shakespeare, by comparison, went to a mere school, village school, and so could hardly have compared with the cultural richness imbibed by Oxford. The hell he couldn't. Stratford was no village, and the grammar school, which means elementary education in America, was in fact a cradle of serious classical learning in Elizabethan England. By the time he was 13 or so, Shakespeare would have read works by Terence, Plautus, Virgil, Erasmus, Cicero, and probably Plutarch and Livy too. One of the greatest stories of the age was what such schooling did for boys of humblest birth. We can go on. I'll go down to the last paragraph. The real problem, and then he said, well, I should do the previous one. How could Shakespeare have known all about kings and queens and courtiers? By writing for them and playing before them over and over again. Next paragraph. The real problem is not all this idiotic misunderstanding of history and the world of the theater, but a fatal lack of imagination on the subject of the imagination. The greatness of Shakespeare is precisely that he did not conform to social type, that he was, in the words of the critic William Hazlitt, no one and everyone. He didn't need to go to Italy, because Rome had come to him at school and came again in the travels of his roaming mind. His capacity for imaginative extension was socially limitless, too, reaching into the speech of tavern tarts as well as archbishops and kings. It is precisely this quicksilver protean quality that, of course, stirs the craving in our flat-footed celeb culture for some more fully fleshed-out author. That's what, thanks heavens, the shape-shifting Shakespeare denies us. But he gives us everything, everyone, and everything and everyone else. As Hazlitt beautifully and perfectly put it, he was just like any other man, but he was like all other men. He was the least of an egoist that it was possible to be. He was nothing in himself, but he was all that others were or that they could become. My suggestion is that you should get your children to admire Shakespeare, and it'll save you a lot of money when they say they want to go to Europe and around the world. You go, nah, you got your books. You got Shakespeare's plays. Just stay here, okay? We can put the money to better use. But that is the point. That is the point. And I'm, as I said, so old that when I was young, you didn't even dream of going to Europe. I mean, it was just out of the question. And maybe when you were done, as a matter of fact, when I graduated, I had a collection of something, and I didn't want to part with it. But if I did, I'd get $600, and it would be a boat ticket to Europe. So I did it. But it was only then, after I'd read all those books. And so I went all over the place and said, gee whiz, it's different than I thought it looked like in my imagination. But I had something to compare it with, what I had nurtured by reading books. The next section, European history, and I've given you 1450 through 1700. And if you just quickly flip the pages, you'll see that on page 23, it says Birth of Shakespeare, and then it says died 1616. And then 24, the death of Shakespeare. And I've given you events before, during, and after. Why? Well, many people like to say, oh, this play by Shakespeare is really about an historical event of the times. That's not fair. But at the same time, was Shakespeare aware of what was going on in the world? Yes, he was. And the one example I'll give you, and there's tons of others, so we do have to know roughly what were the events that surrounded Shakespeare. Well, there's two I'll give you. The first is 1500 on page 22, birth of Charles V of Habsburg, who later became Lord of the Netherlands in 1515. King of Spain in 1516, was elected Holy Roman Emperor in 1519. He ruled most of Europe until his abdication in 1556. I don't think I've got it listed here. Well, when he abdicated, why did he abdicate? What did he do? He went into a monastery. Kings going into monastery? Well, look at the dates of Charles, 1500 through 16, no, I'm sorry. Where did he die? I forget where he dies. Oh, it said, didn't it say that? Until his death, or his abdication in 1556. I'm not exactly sure where or when he dies, but the point is, what are the things that are happening during that whole period of time? Let's look down at the bottom. Martin Luther, 1517, nails his 95 Theses to the door of the cathedral in Wittenberg, beginning of the Protestant Reformation. And he, Charles, is Holy Roman Emperor, which means he's the Holy Roman Emperor over the faithful Catholic duchies and kingdoms and the rebelling Protestant ones. Well, what happened in the Reformation, it would drive me to the monastery to abdicate and get out. Well, Shakespeare has a play, as I mentioned earlier, Measure for Measure. And there's disorder in Vienna. The laws are loose, particularly laws on houses of ill repute and so forth and so on, and the liquor laws. And the Duke of Vienna announces he's going into retirement in a monastery. Interesting. Where did Will get that idea? But it's not exactly a play out of Charles V, and you can't say that. So Shakespeare's plays take up many of the themes that are occurring in the world at the time of his life, which leads me to tell you right away one of my punchlines about Shakespeare. And I think I would have said it when Mary was there. Shakespeare stands at a time, and it's not unlike ours, except I think we're in sadder situation, although a lot of it comes out of the Reformation, so I'm not so sure I can say it's any sadder in that regard. It just looked, maybe it was more viable then. I think Shakespeare stood back, type of man who stood back, and he looked backwards and said, how did we get here? I mean, how do we have a Reformation going on? What happened? And that you can see in his Roman plays. He goes all the way back and he writes Roman plays, he writes Greek plays, he writes medieval plays, he writes Renaissance plays. I mean, the subjects are, and then he looks forward and says, where are we going? And he has a play called Hamlet. And in Hamlet, Hamlet went to Würzburg, the University of Würzburg. He has to duke it out with Laertes. Laertes went to the University of Paris. That's a Catholic university. And Würzburg, I think it's Würzburg, is a Protestant university. And so in the play Hamlet, and Hamlet's soul, to be or not to be, that is the question, and so forth and so on. That may be Shakespeare's reflection on the problems of the Reformation and the conflict between a Catholic and a Protestant perspective on things, but at a very high level. And so Shakespeare, I think, ultimately is trying to figure out how we got from the past to here and where we're going. But now I've told you the deepest things about Shakespeare, when in fact there's the surface things about Shakespeare. And the surface things are, he's a good storyteller. Turn to page 26. Here's a list of all of his known plays for which he was allegedly fully responsible. There's another one, Sir Thomas More, for which he wrote part of it. And we know what part he wrote. So these are only the full ones. And what you have here is a timeline when it was first performed and when it was first printed. And so here's the one list of all the plays in this folder. Turn next, Shakespeare's Theater, Playhouses in the Globe, Theaters and Palaces. Turn Audience Experiences, Actors, Costumes, Staging, Stage and Screen after Shakespeare. And this all comes from Folger. So I'm giving you resources that you could use. And then turn, you can turn it sideways, 33, the Shakespearean Stage. So this is just a snapshot of a book. And if you were to become a Shakespearean groupie, these are useful books, which would allow you to do deep dive about not interpretations of the plays, but about the situation of the theater and Shakespeare's theater in his time. And then turn 34, Memoirs of the Principal Actors in the Plays of Shakespeare. We just write about everything. The next one on page 35, Shakespeare on Film. Mr. Powers is too mesmerized by reading Shakespeare to tell you about films. You'll have to get somebody else to come down and do that for you. So now we turn towards we're moving towards the prize. Yeah, it says it's 1 o'clock. Well, now I've lost track of time. You're in bad shape, I'm in good shape. Reading Shakespeare. So turn to page 38. So look, first and foremost, we must always keep an eye on the prize. The plays were first composed to be produced, to be staged. And so staging Shakespeare is the alpha, and ultimately I'm not so sure I would agree it's the omega. It's the beginning, but is it the end of why we do Shakespeare? So publishing Shakespeare. When did publishing begin? Well, first of all, the poems, I want to mention that, were put together in 1609. Well, that's 7 years before he died. And the poems are the first publication of a final text. But then, the original composition, well, the original printed versions of the plays were either quartos or folios. And a quarto would be a piece of paper taken 8.5 by 11 and folded in half and then folded in 4. And then that would be a quarto. And you would do this with papers. It came out of one piece of paper. And the quartos were used they were the playbooks from which you memorized your lines. And there are different playbooks for the same play. And so so the problem is which quarto was the authoritative one. It's always been a problem. And there's a guest table over there. I'm sorry, it's a display table. And I've got a republication of all the quartos. It's a heavy book. But then there's also the first folio. And the first folio was published in 1623. And John Hemming and Henry Condell brought together all of Shakespeare's plays that were extant at that time and published them for the first time. And the first folio is the original authoritative, sort of was the Rosetta Stone, by which you try and understand all further discoveries of Shakespearean plays. And that's over there also. So the next is 43. They gave us Shakespeare, John Hemmings and Henry Condell. They were the two editors of the folio. And the argument is if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have Shakespeare. On page 44, and by the way, the portrait that's on the other booklet you've got, that's at the entrance, the beginning of the folio. Here's a beautiful poem by Hugh Holland. It's an epitaph, or what do you call it? It's a eulogy about William Shakespeare. And I give you that as one example. There's like five eulogies in there. Ben Jonson wrote one of them. What's my point? By 1623, Will Shakespeare was admired. He was eulogized. He didn't have to be discovered. He already was legend. But he wasn't legend. He was living. And the last line of that, let's see, I don't want to read the whole thing, which crowned him poet first, then poet's king, period. If tragedies might any prologue have, all those he made would scarce make a one to this, : where fame now that he gone is to the grave, des public trying house, the nuncius is, for though his line of life went soon about, the life yet of his lines shall never out. And that's my point about where is Shakespeare on the boards in 2019. The life of his lines never went out. Although I must admit there are some productions of Shakespeare I wish they would die. Page 45. Okay. So page 45 and 46. Okay, all of you of weak memory, I used to think I had a good memory, and these days, as Justin can justify, that's questionable. So do I remember all the plots of all the plays? No. So what do I need? I need like a cheat book. I need plot outlines of Shakespeare's histories, tragedies, and comedies. But which one do I go to? So for all of you parents who are worried that your children are cheating and using the internet and going to, what's it called? Cliff Notes, and that's an old one. And then there's Grade Saver. I just love that title. No, forget them all. But there is one that I recommend, because I've got to have one that I can recommend to students. It's called eNotes. But it's almost too intellectual and it's too edifying. But for example, why is eNotes interesting? They give you 4 different summaries of whatever book they're reviewing. That's nice, that they don't assume that one summary is good enough. And they usually tend to be by people who have reputations. Or if they give you essays, they name who wrote the essays, and they're pretty significant. Well, these 3 are over there. They're out of print, like all good books. And Dr. Fahey, who lectured here once, I gave them to him to read, and he just told me the other day, he says, these are so good, we've got to reproduce them. So he's got on his list that Thomas More Press will actually reproduce these. But you need an outline that you can remember the plays, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. Page 47, 48, Shakespeare Lexicon and Quotations Dictionary. Alexander Schmidt in the 19th century, before there were all sorts of databases, compiled an authoritative list which has never been refuted of every word in Shakespeare and every use of every word in Shakespeare. God bless him. I've got reproductions of the 2 volumes over there if you want to take a look at them. So, as a matter of fact, I was in my room and I'd already packed the book and I wanted to look one up, but I couldn't because I'd already taken it downstairs. Turn to page 49, Folger's Shakespeare Library. Well, this is the information sheets, this one and the next through 51, about what the resources you can get from the Folger Shakespeare Library. Of course, you can just pick up the plays and read them, but there are resources there which would be helpful. You can get all the plays online, but I wasn't going to try, and I'm not authoritative on which online sources of the text are the best. Then on page 51, Dr. Fahey gave this to me as a gift. I haven't read it yet. The Millionaire and the Bard, Henry Folger's obsessive hunt for Shakespeare's first folio. Now, out of about 70 first folios that they say were originally printed, we, the world, has about 24 of them, or 25. But at Folger's time in the 1930s, no. They just didn't know where there was one. Okay, now we get to 52, 53, 54, and 55. This is the interesting stuff. And this is really worth pondering. I spend at least one full class on just these 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. What have we got here? All the plays, but they are organized according to the historical time of the action. And then on the right, you have the setting or the location. So look, there's Troilus and Cressida. It's about the Trojan War. The Trojan War is 1194, 1184 BC. And then if you flip, go to page 54. The Merry Wives of Windsor, down at the bottom, The Merchant of Venice, The Taming of the Shrew, Twelfth Night, As You Like It. No, excuse me, Twelfth Night. Those are the time of Shakespeare. Then you get into plays in which the time of the action is not specified. And what's so interesting about these last plays, so the whole history of Western civilization, more or less, is in the chronology of Shakespeare's topics, of the subjects of his plays. So he goes 800 BC, 400 BC, 42 BC, AD 16, AD 250, 450, 1000, 1300, 14th century, 14th century, a lot from the 14th century. And Shakespeare knew something was going to happen pretty soon. It wasn't going to be good. And then come the plays in the 15th century, or 16th century, actually. Unspecified time of action. Midsummer Night's Dream. Anyone ever read Midsummer Night's Dream or seen it performed? Odd play. Was Athens really like that in the ancient times? No wonder they fell. Unless, of course, it's an imagined world. And then we go to The Tempest and The Winter's Tale. Contemporary with Shipwreck off coast of Bermuda. Here's another classic. Oh, The Tempest is about the founding of a community on Bermuda. No. He read that there had been a shipwreck off Bermuda, and that's an island in the Atlantic, isolated by itself, and that gave him an idea. And so there's a magical character to the shipwreck and what they discover on the island. The same with The Winter's Tale. Has anyone ever read Winter's Tale? A few? Okay. A resurrection takes place at the end of the play. Interesting. Is it Christ? No. Could be Mary. Very interesting. So what's my point? When Shakespeare had unspecified times of action, he was moving out of history, or he was moving above history. And he was taking a deep dive in reflections about things that happen elsewhere. And I'll leave it at that to be mysterious. Turn to page 56, 57, 58. Well, what are Shakespeare's sources? Well, he has many, but steadfastly for the history plays, it's Holinshed's Chronicles. But as I'm going to show you in a couple minutes, if we've got any time left, Shakespeare changes the sources. And then there's Plutarch's Lives. And noble Romans, noble Grecians, and the Romans. And Shakespeare borrows heavily, like Julius Caesar, but he changes the sources. And finally, on page 59, biblical references in Shakespeare's plays. Shaheen, it's over there on the display table. It's a huge book this thick. This man, this was his whole life. The fellow who wrote those plot lines, that was his whole work, his whole life, because he felt Shakespeare deserved it. Shaheen went through all the Shakespeare plays this thick and found every biblical reference, and he's got them cataloged. Direct quote, abbreviated quote, allusion, clearly an implication, and then he talks about that quote, and he'll give you the biblical text. And what it shows is that Shakespeare was mightily, mightily influenced, not merely by reason, but also by faith. And when it comes to reason, hopefully if I have any time, I'll be able to give you some examples. So that takes care of this. There is a part 4, Shakespeare, Church of England and Church of Rome. My concluding comments will be about that. Joseph Pierce spoke here once, and he's a colleague of mine. He has been at Thomas More College. Claire Asquith, I know of. So they have two understandings of Shakespeare as a Catholic, and I have another. And I don't disagree with them. I'm sure they're right. They did the work that why don't they just say it right now? So Joseph Pierce went through all the legal records to confirm that Shakespeare was a registered Catholic. Claire Asquith, and then he shows how Catholicism helps you understand the plays. And as a matter of fact, that's what the Ignatius Shakespeare series is based on. It assumes that Shakespeare is a really solid Catholic author. And I'll tell you right now, my one concern or criticism is it's a little too flat-footed when they say, well, this is Catholic. And Shakespeare's a little more subtle than that. But we live in a defensive age where everybody needs to defend their man. And so we don't want all of those crazy existentialist, literary professors at Wacko University interpreting what the play means. So we've got to come out with our defense and account. And that's wonderful, except you can go a little too far with it, and then it sort of flattens the play. Claire Asquith makes the argument that in fact, the plays, she understands there's good storytelling there. But the plays themselves, she says, were written in such a way as code for Catholics to keep their spirit alive. And they were also code with regard to the priests from France in England. And so she says there's a shadow play going on. If you look at the play, you can look at it just on the level of a story about Rome or the story about Ardennes in England. But there's more than that, she says. There is this whole Catholic It's a way of passing messages between Catholics. If you read the play, you got a message, and it gave you hope for sustaining yourself in the hard times of the Reformation. And they were hard. Think of Thomas More in the last days in the Tower. Now, so just to state it right now, am I in objection with what they're saying? No, not at all. But I think there's another shadow play going on. And that goes back, and I'll just say it at the beginning, and then we'll see what we can do for presentations. I said at the beginning, he is the, Shakespeare, you don't have to turn to it, is the paradigmatic poet, philosopher, and somewhere I added prophet. So Shakespeare is highly religious. He's really taking the Bible very seriously. But at the same time, he also takes reason very, very seriously. He's a very philosophic man. And one of his heroes is Plato and Socrates. So that takes care of the first, this handout. And it gives you a background for Shakespeare. But Mr. Fowd, what's our time and what do you think?
We're at about 45 minutes. So
We've done 45 minutes.
we've done 45 minutes.
Oh, good, I got another hour. All right, very good. That is a joke, all right? And so the first one, if you pull the other book out, the first play that we want to look at, but no, we don't want to look at it. We want to see it performed. And so it's the tragedy of Julius Caesar, but I also have to tell you, the play is sometimes called the life and times of Julius Caesar. So in fact, it's ambiguous as to whether it's the tragedy of Julius Caesar. For a very simple reason. For those who've read Julius Caesar, whose death does the play end with? Anybody? Who?
Brutus.
Brutus. And he's said to have been the noblest Roman of them all. So is the play the tragedy of Brutus, but not of Caesar? Would that be why the play is called The Life and Times, or the history of Julius Caesar? But without much ado, let us see a performance of Act 1, Scene 1. It's a Rome street. Enter Flavius, Marulus, and certain commoners over the stage. Enter.
Pen told me, idle creatures. Is this a holiday? What? No, you're not being mechanical. You ought not walk about the streets without the sign of your profession. Speak. What trade art thou?
I, sir, a carpenter.
Where is thy leather apron in thy room? What dost thou with thy best apparel on? You, sir, what trade are you?
Truly, sir, in respect of a fine workman, I am, but as you would say, a cobbler.
But what trade art thou? Answer me directly.
A trade, sir, that I hope I may use with a safe conscience, is indeed, sir, a mender of bad souls.
What trade thou, knave? Thou naughty knave, what trade?
Nay, I beseech you, sir, be not out with me. Yet, if you be out, I can mend you.
What mean'st thou by that? Mend me, thou saucy fellow.
Why, sir, cobble you.
Thou art the cobbler, art thou?
Truly, sir, all that I live by is with thee all. I meddle with no tradesmen's matters, nor women's matters, but with all. I am indeed, sir, a surgeon to old shoes. When they are in great danger, I recover them.
Why therefore are you not in your shop today? Why dost you leave these men about the streets?
Truly, sir, to wear out their shoes, to get myself into more work. But indeed, sir, we make holiday to see Caesar and rejoice in his triumph.
Wherefore rejoice? What conquest brings thee home? What tributaries follow him to Rome? To grace in captive bonds his chariot wheels? You blocks, you stones, you worse than senseless things. Oh, you hard hearts, you cruel men of Rome, knew you not Pompey? Many a time enough have you climbed up to walls and battlements, to towers and windows, yea, to chimney tops, your infants in your arms. And there have sat the livelong day in patient expectation to see great Pompey pass the streets of Rome. And when you saw his chariot but appear, have you not made a universal shout that Tiber trembled underneath her banks to hear the replication made in her concave shores? And do you now put on your best attire? And do you now call out a holiday? And do you now strew flowers in his way that walks in triumph over Pompey's blood? Begone! Run to your houses, fall upon your knees, pray to the gods to intermit the plague that needs much light on this ingratitude.
Go, go, good countrymen, and for this fault assemble all the poor men of your sort. Drive them to the Tiber banks and weep your tears to the lowest stream. Do kiss the most exalted shores of all. See their base metal, they banners tongue-tied in their guiltiness. Go to the Capitol, and this way will I. Destroy the images if you find them decked with ceremonies.
May we do so? You know it is the feast of Lupercal.
It is no matter. Let no image of Caesar's trophies be hung. All about, drive away the vulgar from the streets. So too, if you perceive them thick, these growing feathers plucked from Caesar's wings will make him fly at an ordinary pitch. Who else would soar above the view of men, keep us all in servile fearfulness?
Thank you, commoners, tribunes, Caesar. Before we do the next part, first of all, notice it's called a tragedy, but that's very funny. It's a very funny scene. It's a classic example of comedy comes at the beginning even of a tragedy. Second, commoners are pretty smart. They at least punish us with puns, lots of them, and they're good ones. There's also a play there on soles of shoes and men's souls. And in a way, you will find out that the play is about the soul of Rome. Brutus has a soul, Cassius has a soul, but does Caesar have a soul? Or is he an empty man who is only a will and nothing more? And he seems to be an anonymous person. Suggestion that in all of Shakespeare's great plays, Scene 1 of Act 1 gives you the whole play, if you mine it. You have to be, I say, to read Shakespeare's plays, you have to like detective mysteries. You've either got a dead or a live body, and you got to figure out who's the victim and what are the signs as to whether it's alive or dead. I'm very serious about this. And to make the point that this Act 1, and we could go off on it, why doesn't Flavius want all of this? He says, Caesar will fly a pitch above us, beyond the clouds. We won't be able to see him. But Flavius's indication, what he's getting there is, he'll be like a god up on Mount Olympus who will rule us, and we will be tyrannized by him. So we can't let this happen because the people will be the wings on which Caesar will rise to a tyrannical status. Well, to make the point about Caesar, which I think is there in Act 1, which Flavius and Marulus made, the tribunes, we have Act 1, Scene 2, with Calpurnia, with Caesar, and with Mark Antony, and I think they're over there. Or are they coming forward? Oh, they're coming forward.
Calpurnia! Peace, ho! Caesar speaks. Calpurnia.
Here, my lord. Stand you directly in Antonius's way when he doth run his course. Antonius.
Caesar, my lord.
Forget not in your speed, Antonius, to touch Calpurnia. For our elders say that the baron, touched in this holy chase, do lose their sterile curse.
I shall remember. When Caesar says, do this, it will be performed.
Set on, and leave no ceremony out.
So you remember from the commoners, Flavius and Marulus were upset that the commoners are fickle. You greeted Pompey when he was alive, home in triumph. Now Pompey's been defeated by Caesar, and now you're on Caesar's side. You're fickle. Get out of here. And Caesar will rule us from on high. He has no opposition. So what do we get in Act 1, Scene 2? We get Caesar showing my will. is the authority here. I command, exclamation points. That's all. And everybody goes, yes, sir, yes, sir. So that's a good example, at least in a tragedy, of how there is a comedy in the background, but then there's also a tragedy up front. Now, later on, and we're not going to have time to I just want to mention this, Shakespeare plays with his sources. So Caesar, just before he goes to the forum and where he's killed, I'll make the argument, and you should read the play. I think you can figure it out. It takes time to figure it out. One of the arguments that a number of us believe is true is Caesar knows he's going to be killed. He wants to be killed. He wants to be able to give that speech where he says, I am like the North Star, I shall not be moved. I'm as constant as the Northern Star, I will not be moved. And then he's able to put the blame on Brutus, et tu, Brute. And so he comes across as the hero. Well, just before he goes, and all the conspirators are at his house, and he's saying he's not going to go because Calpurnius said, I had a dream, and oh my God, don't go, they're going to kill you. He says, no, well, you're right, okay, I won't go. And then he hears something that one of the conspirators, pretending to be a friend, says, and he goes, Calpurnia, you're wrong. I'm going. And our argument is, Caesar figured out, okay, today's the day, they're going to do it. I'm going. So what does he say? He's got people there, and he says, bade them prepare within. I am to blame to be thus waited for. Now, Cinna, now Medalus, what, Trebonius? I have an hour's talk in store for you. Remember that you call on me today. Be near me that I may remember you. Smell like any lines you heard? Say from a gospel? Trebonius, Caesar, I will, aside. And then Trebonius goes, and so near will I be that your best friends will wish I had been farther. Then Caesar says, good friends, go in and taste some wine with me, and we, like friends, will straightway go together. Sound like anything? Are we smelling maybe the passion scene of Christ? And then some of you are going to say, are you trying to tell me that Caesar is Christ? No, not at all. Well, then what are you trying to say? I don't know. You got to figure it out. You got to figure it out. That's Shakespeare. He's very rich. He's very complex. He's very mysterious. So the simplest thing I'll say is, when Shakespeare writes his Julius Caesar, he doesn't want to write an antiquarian play about a man who died and we don't have any interest in him anymore. He wants to write a play from his perspective, knowing that what succeeds to the Roman Empire? Christianity. And so the Christian story is already pregnant in Rome in an undeveloped way. And so Shakespeare is writing a much richer version of Julius Caesar than merely Plutarch's Lives. Now, there's a second play, there's two more, but the second play that follows Julius Caesar is Antony and Cleopatra, because Julius is dead, Augustus Caesar, Octavius, has succeeded, and Antony, and then there's what do you call it, what's his name? It's Octavius, it's Mark Antony, and the third one, I can't remember his name. He's called the Moneybags. Yes?
Leonidas?
No, sorry, it's not. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not Leonidas. But okay, nice try. But let's let it go. But the point is, it comes down to Antony and Octavius. And so what does Antony do? He runs off to Egypt. Why does he do this? So we have the opening scene from Antony and Cleopatra. And the two people who are doing it have to go back to their salad days before they were Mr. and Mrs. So if you open up, you can read it. Just 1 second. Open up to page 9. It's quite short. 9, 10. It's actually, so start on 10. That's where the text is. Go ahead.
Are we reading all of the voices?
Yes, you're reading the whole thing.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to do the first part. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Mary is so subtle. Philo. So before I read it, let me tell you, in the table of contents of the people that Plutarch writes about, there's one character named Eros, and Eros is in the play because when Mark Antony asks Eros to kill him, and Eros doesn't, he turns on himself. So Mark Antony has to kill himself. There is no character in Plutarch's Lives called Philo. What's the difference between philo and ero? Philo is philia, it's friendship, in Greek, philosophy, the origin of it. Eros is the more intimate, the only word I would use is erotic understanding of love, as contrasted with the calmness of philia, or a friendship. So Plutarch sees Antony as a man who is smitten by eros, but not by friendship. So Shakespeare introduces a character that didn't exist. He invents that character. He does it quite often. And the person's name is Philo, and it serves as a preface, an overview for the whole play. I read, "Nay, but this dotage of our generals o'erflows the measure. Those his goodly eyes that o'er the files and musters of the war have glowed like plated Mars, now bend, now turn the office and devotion of their view upon a tawny front. His captain's heart, which in the scuffles of great fights hath burst the buckles on his breast, reneges all temper, and is become the bellows and the fan to cool a gypsy's lust." Tough story here. By the way, none of you seem to be old as me, so would the name Elizabeth Taylor mean anything to you? Okay, it did. Obviously, I got a rise out of people. She didn't have to act when she played Cleopatra. "Flourish, enter Antony, Cleopatra, her ladies, the train, with eunuchs fanning her."
If it be love indeed, tell me how much.
There's beggary in the love that can be reckoned.
I'll set a bourne how far to be beloved.
Then must thou needs find out new heaven, new earth.
"Enter a messenger. Messenger, news, my good lord, from Rome."
Grates me, the sum.
Nay, hear them, Antony. Fulvia perchance is angry, or who knows if the scarce bearded Caesar hath not sent his powerful mandate to you. Do this, or this, take in that kingdom, and enfranchise that. Perform it, or else we damn thee.
How, my love?
Perchance? Nay, and most like. You must not stay here longer. Your dismission is come from Caesar. Therefore hear it, Antony. Where's Fulvia's process? Caesar's, I would say. Both? Call in the messengers. As I am Egypt's queen, thou blushest, Antony, and that blood of thine is Caesar's homager, else so thy cheek pay shame when shrill-tongued Fulvia scolds. The messengers.
Let Rome and Tiber melt, and the wide arch of the ranged empire fall. Here is my space. Kingdoms are clay. Our dungy earth alike feeds beast as man. The nobleness of life is to do thus, when such a mutual pair and such a twain can do it, in which I bind, on pain of punishment, the world to weet, we stand up peerless.
Excellent falsehood. Why did he marry Fulvia and not love her? I'll seem the fool I am not. Antony will be himself.
But stirred by Cleopatra. Now for the love of love and her soft hours, let's not confound the time with conference harsh. There's not a minute of our lives should stretch without some pleasure now. What sport tonight?
Hear the ambassadors.
Fie, wrangling queen, whom everything becomes, to chide, to laugh, to weep, whose every passion fully strives to make itself in thee fair and admired. No messenger but thine, and all alone, tonight will wander through the streets and note the qualities of people. Come, my queen, last night you did desire it. Speak not to us.
Exeunt Antony and Cleopatra with the train. Demetrius, is Caesar with Antonius prized so slight? Philo, sir, sometimes when he is not Antony, he comes too short of that great property which still should go with Antony. Demetrius, I am full sorry that he approves the common liar, who thus speaks of him at Rome. But I will hope of better deeds tomorrow. Rest you happy. Exeunt. Thank you very much. So once again, this is an Act 1, Scene 1, in which you get the whole play. You get the judgment of Antony from Philo, who's not a character that Plutarch knew of, and Shakespeare sets up that character to give you the judgment, which is interesting because what Shakespeare is telling you is, hey, I'm going to tell you the outcome of the play from the very beginning, and you will still stay to watch the play. Why? Because the drama is how it unfolds, not any surprise ending. Comedies, they have a surprise ending, not the tragedies. You know exactly what's going to happen. Okay, so what's the whole tragedy? Antony has run away from Rome. He's run away from honor. He no longer wants to be a soldier. He doesn't think it's worth it. And why not? There's nothing more to conquer. Rome owns everybody. They own the world. And so it's boring. And the only thing left is something as exciting as Cleopatra. And for those of you who have read Virgil's Aeneas, Aeneas is the opposite of Antony. Aeneas is the one who was in Carthage with Dido. And she said, stay, Aeneas, stay, stay, stay. And he says, no, I have duty. I have duty. Antony says, oh, fie on duty. I want nothing to do with Rome. I've had it. I'm fed up with it. And so he says, it must be you and me. Well, does Shakespeare tend to agree with Antony about the condition of Rome? Yes, because he refers to Octavius as the universal landlord. That by that point in Rome's history, they own the world, and now they just collect taxes. And what will save Rome? Shakespeare himself knows it'll only be Christianity. He's very subtle about that. Now, how do we get across that Shakespeare is thinking of Christianity? Anybody familiar with these lines? Cleopatra, if it be love indeed, tell me how much. There's beggary in the love that can be reckoned. I'll set a bourne how far to be loved. Antony's line, then must thou needs find out new heaven, new earth. Anybody know where that line is from? Revelation. It's straight out of the book of Revelation. So it's odd that Shakespeare will use Antony to forecast or prophesy about something he has no idea of, but he yearns for in some way. He yearns for. And finally, the last thing about this play, there's so much to talk about it, but of course we're not going to. Cleopatra's fickle, and they could have won the battle against Octavius. There's a naval battle, and Antony had the right strategy, but she pulled her ships at the last second. Yeah, leave it to Elizabeth Taylor. That's exactly what she does. Pulls out on her man. Okay. And he's cornered, and now he begs of Caesar. Not begs, but he says, look, if I can't go back to Rome, and you're not going to allow that, and I really have no future here in Egypt, things haven't gone well with Cleopatra, I ask you to allow me to be a private man in Athens. That's the line in the play. And for anyone who's got a kind of philosophy background, you go, whoa, that sounds like Socrates. And in fact, it probably is. A philosopher, one who withdraws from the public arena because it's chaos, it's disorder. I'm hoping that there's a lot of people around these days who are withdrawing from the boundaries of Washington, D.C. because it's chaos and are going about their private lives, living in a certain tranquility and contentment because it's just nuts down there no matter which side you're on. Of course, except, of course, for tranquil Kentucky with Senator McConnell and Rand Paul. That's supposed to be a joke. And we watch Kentucky politics up north, because as goes Kentucky politics, so goes many of the things in the nation. Okay, so that's that play. And so it's very sad, and it's the end of the Roman Empire. Just a very quick word, there's a third play that goes along with these two. It's a trio. And the third one is Coriolanus. Coriolanus is about the early Republic, 500 BC. Then Julius Caesar is about BC, AD, the turn from BC to AD, 44 BC. And then Antony and Cleopatra is about 70 years later. So it's the beginning, it's the rise, the decline, and the demise of the Roman world, the Roman Republic, the Roman Empire. He wrote these two plays early. Julius Caesar was the first, then Antony and Cleopatra, and he didn't write Coriolanus until sometime, or compose it until sometime around 1615, let's say. So you would think, well, that play doesn't fit with the other two. But when you read Coriolanus, then you read Julius Caesar, and then you read Antony and Cleopatra, you realize they're seamless. They fit together. How could a man, 15 years later, write a play that is seamless with the other two? You would think he would have learned new things. And my suggestion is Shakespeare had such a capacious mind that the whole story of the beginning, the middle, and the end was there when he wrote Julius Caesar. He saw and understood exactly what he wanted to say about Rome's republic and empire, and that's how thoughtful he was about these things. so that no one says the play doesn't work, Coriolanus doesn't work with the other two. Everybody agrees they do work. So that would be the second example. And Justin, I don't think we're going to have time to do much more. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? All right, so let me go to my conclusion. And I apologize for all the thespians who were waiting to participate in Much Ado About Nothing. Or I was also going to say something, I will say one quick thing about Henry V, which many probably have seen. Henry V was Prince Hal, and his buddy when he was younger was Falstaff. So how many people here are familiar with Falstaff and have heard the name or the character? Anybody? Okay, so Falstaff is a classic, very funny, very enjoyable to be around, alcoholic, dissolute sot. That's about all you can say about him. But he's charming. But he's always mooching off everybody else. And he makes his living by robbing people. And Hal, who's to be the future king of England, robs with him. Well, first of all, Falstaff is a famous character, and everybody says, oh, where did he get that source from? It turns out that the Falstaff that we know and kind of love in Shakespeare's plays was invented by Shakespeare. So there are things which Shakespeare has invented which have become standard issue. The other one is, you know the phrase, have you ever heard the phrase, hey, I don't understand that, it's only Greek to me? That's Cato from Julius Caesar. Cicero walks by him and speaks Greek, and Brutus and Cassius want to know, what did he say? And Cato goes, hey, I don't know, he just spoke Greek. And we don't even know that those things come from Shakespeare. So unfortunately, and maybe I'll just let the fellow do it, we should end with a love poem. So who is our poet laureate? Who's going to recite sonnet? So we haven't talked about the sonnets.
From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. But as the riper should by time decrease, his tender air might bear his memory. But thou contracted to thine own bright eyes, feed'st thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies, thyself, thy foe, to thy sweet self too cruel. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, and only herald to the gaudy spring, within thine own bud buriest thy content, and tender churl makest waste in niggarding. Pity the world, or else this glutton be, to eat the world's due by the grave and thee.
If you find it interesting, there's 153 more sonnets. He published them very early, and they are love poetry. And that's sort of on the note which I'll end my last few comments. To return to our prologue, just as important as listening to a memorizing storyteller, students, when they read Shakespeare, discover him to be an exceptionally gifted thinker. As I said earlier, a kind of philosopher, or perhaps a prophet, whose characters give voice to the most important questions and rich responses concerning the nature and purpose of man and the cosmos with which we dwell from birth to death. As you read and reread Othello, The Taming of the Shrew, or Henry IV, you come to realize that William S. is among the truly wise ones of our civilization, whose mission is to educate the souls of those who see, hear, and read his plays about the God-given beauty of man's nature, by entertaining their hearts and minds with the finely wrought artistic beauty of his enduring dramas. Quote from a 20th century bard, encountering Shakespeare's drama is akin to falling in love. Suddenly we realize that we've been inspired by a beauty that dissolves all interest in ourselves or any sense of time passing, all the while intensifying our awareness of ourselves as enchanted lovers who hope for nothing more than to linger in the presence of our beloved who delights us endlessly. And when we finish reading one of William's dramas, we, as lovers of Shakespeare, are so grateful to learn that there are 30 more plays to read. Thank you very much for your patience.